So thank you for being here today for the MyStar Learning Series. We've got a great topic and a great presenter joining us today. We're talking about engaging reluctant readers with MyStar. We've got some good examples of in-unit literacy examples that maybe you are going to be teaching that unit next year and you're going to look for those. And we also have some templates that maybe you can use in your classroom still this year. So we're really excited for this topic, and we thank you so much for being here today. For our session today, we're going to get a little bit of an overview of Reading Apprenticeship, just to ground everyone in why we're here today. And then we will look at utilizing multiple types of text in a science classroom and how you can engage your students with these types of texts. Then we'll do an activity with reciprocal and paired annotated think aloud inquiry. We'll do some breakout room work with that. And then we'll end with a little breakout room reflection where you can look at some of these examples, look at some of the templates that are available, and maybe make a plan for your classroom tomorrow if you need something to get through Friday. So we're really excited for the content today and so thankful for our speaker, Heather Howlett, who's here with us from Reading Apprenticeship. And so without further ado, we will kick off our icebreaker. So if you haven't done so already, please hop into the slides. And on slide 4, we would like you to consider what counts as text in science. And so there's a bunch of green check marks there at the bottom. Feel free to grab one of those. You can also make your own shape and color if you'd like to be a little creative in this afternoon session. But throw in check marks. What do you think we could use as a text in a science classroom? All right, boy, looks like we got lots of check marks on this screen all over the place. We got a pro group here today, it seems like. So we are going to really dig into what counts as a text in science and look at some different examples today. So thank you so much for engaging your brains on this icebreaker here. And we've got some different examples of these different texts too. So just a quick overview, MyStar has partnered with Reading Apprenticeship to integrate more literacy opportunities into our units. Reading Apprenticeship is a research project through WestEd that's focused on developing text-rich science investigations that increase students' opportunities to learn science and literacy. We found that it's been integrating really well into our units, and we're looking forward to expanding to more as we continue this partnership. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Heather Howlett is here. She is the Director of Professional Learning for Reading Apprenticeship at WestEd. And we're really excited to hear what you have to say today, Heather. Thank you so much for being here.
Sure, thanks for having me, everyone. Yeah, Heather, and by the way, I am a Michigan native. I live in Stockbridge, which is between Lansing and Jackson. I'm also a middle school science teacher, so I am speaking to my peeps, and I totally love that. I'm so glad you guys are all here. And the collaboration between Reading Apprenticeship and MyStar has been really fruitful and exciting. Of course, again, I'm in my element. I'm working with middle school science teachers, so it's all good. But still, one of the cool things is we had a couple of MyStar teachers who were also trained in Reading Apprenticeship who integrated some text into their units, and we had some other MyStar teachers pilot those units to see how the literacy integration went with their kiddos, and they reported really positive experiences. See, I'm so excited I can't even slow down enough to talk clearly. So needless to say, really excited to share actually some of the text that they incorporated into their units and some of the routines that they paired with them. And so you'll get to kind of really see and experience what they are, as well as have some ideas, hopefully, for your own units. Let's head to the next slide. So I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but you're seeing a list of some of the capabilities that our students need to be able to have. And literacy skills are critical to building knowledge in science. We all know that. So we need to ask ourselves, are we providing enough opportunities for our students to do these things on a regular basis? Are we giving them enough practice? Who's doing the work of the learning in our classrooms? The ones who are doing the reading, thinking, talking, and writing are the ones doing the learning. So how can we provide more opportunity for our kids to practice this? Next slide. So as Lindsay's mentioned, I'm from Reading Apprenticeship, and it's an instructional approach to integrating literacy in the content areas. And because I'm a middle school science teacher, I really practice integrating it into middle school science. But Reading Apprenticeship describes how the relationships between the teacher and the student, the tasks, the text, kind of all come together to engage students in becoming more skillful and confident participants in their own literacy and their own learning. It really empowers them. The metaphor of the apprenticeship really implies learning by doing. And so in a Reading Apprenticeship classroom, the teacher is the master reader in their content area, and they're apprenticing their students to those habits of mind. So the partnership of expertise takes what teachers know and do as discipline-based readers, because we've had lots of years of practice. So we're kind of making that invisible stuff that we do in our head almost naturally visible to our students and having them practice it. And it really builds on where the kids are. So the curriculum expands to include how we read and why we read in the ways that we do, as well as what we're reading about. So the content. Next slide. One of the biggest ahas I had as a science teacher was considering how we can approach text as resources for inquiry. You know, our icebreaker at the beginning said, what counts as text in science? A lot of stuff. Pretty much anything that we ask kids to look at and make sense of, we could count it as a text. And that was like a big shift in my thinking. I thought it had to be words on a page or in a textbook. But truly, what counts as text in science is pretty unique, because we ask our students to look at science phenomena and to do some of those hands-on experiments and to interpret and make sense from it. So that does make it count as a text. But another thing to consider is in those print texts, in those graphs, in those images, if we look at those as a source of inquiry, just like we might a hands-on activity, then we can really approach it in a scientific way. You know, the students need to have the opportunity to practice that. And so especially the diagrams and data, I feel like as a science reader, those are such key pieces of how we represent information in our discipline that, and kids really struggle with that. And I know, again, I'm preaching to the choir, you guys know, but how can we approach them as something that we can kind of all look at and problem solve together and make sense of, so that they're not scared or intimidated by some of those pieces of text, but instead we can engage them into digging into it and figuring it out and kind of looking at it like a puzzle that to be solved. Next slide. But we can't just drop stuff in front of kids and expect them to know how to read it. When we use text as resources for inquiry, we have to scaffold. We have to give them some tools to help. So on the slide, you're seeing some examples of tools, and they're scaffolds. They support the learning task, but they aren't the task itself. So it's not about filling out the chart with the right answer per se. It's how does the chart or the talk stems or whatever routine that we ask them to use with it, how does it help them dig into the text? So how does it scaffold that sense making, right? And the most powerful support for that is what we do as the teacher. You know, using text as resources for inquiry takes expertise, and we know how to make sense of these texts. We've been doing it for a long time. And there's lots of decisions we make about which text we put in front of our kids, but then also how do we show them how to do this sense-making work? What task really is a good fit for it? The teacher really facilitates that metacognitive and sense-making discussion, and really kind of eliciting from students their reading and reasoning processes. Kids are just naturally inquisitive. And if we ask them to look at something and really just share with us, what do you think about this? What's confusing, or what's really exciting, or what grabbed your attention, or what connection could you make? Just having those kinds of conversations can really open up and make text feel a little bit more approachable. Let's go to the next slide. So today we're going to introduce and practice some metacognitive routines for using some of the texts that are in some of the MyStar units. And so that we can kind of just get a sense of, how this might look and sound in our classrooms, as well as the benefits that it can afford for readers. So one of the texts that are in a lot of the MyStar units are video clips. So how do we approach video clips as a source of inquiry? So we're going to go through an example here in unit 7.1. And so we're going to use the video as text. And we want to support our sense-making and metacognitive conversations about it. And in order to do that, if you go to the next slides in the slide deck, you'll see a chart. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? And so we'll play the video clip. It's just a short 2-minute, less than 2-minute video clip. And then I'm going to ask you to grab a line on one of those slides and just note something that you saw and what it made you think, and a question maybe that came up for you. So that's, what did it make you wonder? So you are welcome to just listen completely to the video and then go and capture a thought and a question. Or if you're kind of doing it in the middle of, that's okay too. Whenever the thought occurs to you, when it's fresh, you're going to lock it down on one of those lines in those following slides. So let's go ahead, Chris.
This is a rowing machine that I purchased on Craigslist. And as you've probably guessed by now, I've made some modifications. So let me bring you in a little closer. Here we have 2 permanent magnet DC motors, which are coupled to the flywheel of my rowing machine. Now, when you spin the shaft of a permanent magnet DC motor, it basically becomes a generator. And that's essentially what you're looking at here, a human power generator. I have a whole series of videos where I explain how this works and how I made it. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, you can click on the link that'll pop up right here to see that playlist. But in the meantime, I'm going to take you inside and let the kids show you how we've been using it. You guys ready to play?
Yes!
All right, let's do this thing.
If you keep TV on.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh man, well, let's see what we can do.
You take the TV off of Rob. Let's see. It's working.
Ready? You gotta hurry.
Yes, son.
Who wants to take it?
Me!
Come on, hurry. You gotta go fast. It's recording.
Oh. It's recording us?
Yes, I'm recording you.
Cool.
We're about to play the game with our generator.
Fun.
All right. Yeah, popping over. What did you see? What did you think? What did you wonder? So as we think about how we might leverage a simple routine like see, think, wonder, to make it a text-based conversation, if we use video clips quite a bit as a source of text for our units, we do want our students to take something away from it, right? We put them in, they're in there for a reason, but also it's to generate interest, but then how do we help students kind of stay on track with that, right? So see, think, wonder is a simple kind of organizing structure for that we could have a collaborative document where kids are sharing, or even just verbally, right? But the key kind of, I guess, layer I want to add on to this is not only for them to share with each other what they saw, what they thought, what they wondered, but also start to notice if someone else noticed something different and what that made them think. And, oh, how did that compare to what I thought? I think one of the most powerful pieces of collaborative inquiry into text is when students share peer-to-peer and they hear something cool from someone else that they didn't ever think of before. And they're like, oh, I didn't even notice that. Oh, I never thought of it that way. And as I look over your entries and what you saw, thought, and wondered, there was a lot of stuff that I thought, oh, I didn't really pick up on that the first time. Oh, I never thought of it that way. Maybe that wasn't a connection I had or a question I wondered, but now that I see or hear you virtually saying these things, it's like, oh, interesting. I never thought about that. And so it just really kind of opens up the door for inquiry into the content, into the topic, and the fact that we're using video as text as well. So it could be a really quick kind of engagement routine, but keeps it text-based, right? It keeps it about the video, but also a little bit about what are our students bringing to the table when it comes to questions and connections, because they all have them. So how can we use them to their advantage, right? And that's one of the things I love about the MyStar units is they definitely have kids, share that thinking and build off from it. And as you know, not all curricula, especially in science, do it that way. But as we keep going in this unit, then how can we kind of keep that conversation going to be about what we're reading, but also about how we're making sense of it? What are those questions? What are those connections? How can we learn from each other? So we're going to move to our next text that is actually in this particular unit, 7.1. And this was an addition by one of our Reading Apprenticeship teachers. And so we're going to stay on the theme of a visual text. The video is visual, it's also auditory, but now we're going to take a look at a visual text. And the cool thing about using simple drawings or cartoons is they feel very approachable, right? You're not intimidated when you look at a cartoon and think, oh, how am I going to make sense of this thing? It's more like, oh, okay, how am I going to make sense of this thing? It's a totally different kind of feel to it. So what we're going to do as a group right now is practice a reciprocal think aloud. So when we start doing this piece, we want to activate our schema, right? And usually we're going to start with a more inviting text like this. And so I'm going to model some things that come to my mind. So if you will, we're going to kind of role play a little bit where I'm the teacher, you guys are my students. And so I would put this up either on the board or under a document camera so that everyone can see it. And so then I'm going to start sharing my thinking. And my key kind of piece I want to say here is that I don't want to use this as an opportunity to have a veiled lecture. Instead, I really want to authentically model what happens in my mind when I look at this text and try to make sense of it. So I'm actually going to be, this is a Jamboard. So I'm going to be on it in another screen so that I can annotate as I work here. So I'm going to use, I don't want the sticky note, I want the text box. So right away, when I take a look at this text, the first thing that my eyes are actually drawn to is this guy's head. Because I think because it's right in the middle of the picture. And so it's kind of central there. And I notice he's sweating. Is that going to show up? I'm noted there it is. Okay. It's just taking a second. And then of course, my eyes want to drop down. And a question I have right away is, why is he sweating? By the way, this all happens in like, the blink of, or not even the blink of an eye, probably even faster in my head. But when I model my thinking, I have to slow down and kind of really talk through, where do my eyes go first? What do I think? Then where do I go? Because I'm making my invisible process that's going on in my head visible and starting to articulate that. And sometimes it's really hard to do at first because we're so used to doing it so fast. It happens so fast for us, but it doesn't always happen that fast for our kids. And sometimes they think that reading is magic. But some people just know how to do it, and that's not the case. So we want to really show them, here's how we do this. So he's sweating. Why is he sweating? I see that he's moving. Actually, one of the things I noticed, I'm going to use my little pen marker here, is these little, I think these are supposed to mean movement. I know that when I've seen that in other like cartoons and that sort of thing, that means that something's moving here. So I'm going to just put moving parts. So, okay, that makes sense. If those parts are moving, that's probably why he's sweating, because he's actually pedaling. And now I notice this line here that goes, so that's a chord. So, oh, connection to the video we just watched. So I'm thinking he's powering his TV. And guess what? I remembered one of you said, I wonder if I could put this on my TV. So instead of pulling a rower, this guy is actually pedaling. But that's cool because now I can see where I've got two examples of the same thing happening here. All right, I'm going to pause my Think Aloud and reach out to the class, if you will, and just wonder, what were some of the things that you noticed? What are some of the things that you thought of when you first laid eyes on this? And I'm welcoming folks to unmute and jump in and share, or if you wanted to put something in the chat too, that's fine. What's something that you noticed? Where did your eyes go? And what did you think?
We've got some responses in the chat. So Don says he looks like he's in pain, so we really must need to watch TV. And Mike says, is that water? Sorry, go ahead.
Don, what makes you think he looks like he's in pain? How do you know he's in pain?
I was looking at that and thinking it's his eyebrows, and with the sweat, he looks like he is not having a good time. His mouth, mostly the expression on his face, doesn't look like he's very comfortable.
Okay. I know my boxes are kind of overlapping a little bit, so I apologize. He doesn't look very comfortable. I would agree. Yeah. Like the whole, actually, now that you've said that, this whole white cloud from his mouth, I saw somebody else bring that up too. Wondering about that. I'm guessing it's just hot breath, but then again, it's kind of like, does the poor guy, does he have breathing issues? I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. But that makes sense. I mean, it kind of goes with our schema, right? Like background knowledge of what we know when you're riding a bike and you're pedaling hard, you're sweating, you're breathing hard. Like, okay, we can make some connections to that. Sherry noticed the mouse. The mouse tells us this will help with the energy bill. Anybody have else noticed the mouse? Cute mouse trying to help us understand, Larry said. Help us understand what? What connection? What did you have to know to be able to make that connection with what's there, what the mouse is saying? At least their energy bill will be lower. How did you make the jump to, oh, it's trying to help us understand?
This is Larry. For me, it was like he was saying something about energy, so I knew it had something to do with the electricity.
Okay, all right. So right away, you have the life schema that an energy bill usually means what you get charged for electricity, right? By the electric company. So just pointing out, guys, I know this all seems simple to us, But this is the kind of schema that we bring to it, that if we don't necessarily slow down and think about, how do I know that? Where did I learn that? Or, how did I make that connection? That's the kind of stuff that we can articulate, right, for our kids, because they might not make that connection. And that's okay, because they're young. They might not have that schema yet. But this is where we're apprenticing, right? We're kind of helping to say, here's how I made this connection, or where I went with this and why I went with it, the knowledge I'm bringing. But as you know, sometimes some of the connections that we make aren't always helpful when we read text. Sometimes they take us down a bird walk, or, this path, this tangent that really doesn't really help. So, and students are also good at that. So then when that happens, how do you realize you're off track and bring it back? So these are all parts of the metacognitive conversation, where we're talking about what's going on in our head and how is it helping or not. What did we do with the text? Where in the text? And did it help? And how do we get back on track? All right, I'm actually gonna turn it over. So that's one example of a routine. A reciprocal think aloud is usually when the teacher is kind of leading the conversation, right? And kind of probing from students. So sharing my thinking as a teacher, but also wanting to hear from my class, what are some connections and questions? And now I can say, well, okay, now that you've got a little bit of what I'm after here, let's take it to another text. And I'm going to ask you to practice with a scaffold. So in a think aloud, think alouds are very, very engaging for kids, because there's nowhere to hide. You're going to think aloud and share your thinking as you're reading. And even when you're in a partnership, the partner is going to have a listening role and kind of a job, if you will, to pay attention to what their partner is thinking aloud about. But when we first introduce a routine like this, we need to have a scaffold, because kids won't know what to say. They won't necessarily know how to name things. So we can use metacognitive bookmarks as a support for that. And I'm sure you guys have seen sentence stems of different kinds before. And I will say that, when we, some students need support in being able to notice what they're thinking, to do that, slow down and really pay attention. And then some students need support with how to express their thinking. They don't really know how to say it, especially maybe some of our English language learners might not really be sure how to phrase it. So when we introduce think aloud, usually we model with a brief segment of text and then turn it over to students. It's really important to get kids practicing this as quick as possible. So we're going to do that very thing. Actually, Chris, if you could jump ahead and show an example of the text, I want to kind of model for folks what I'm going to be asking them to do. So you're going to head to a breakout room in a minute, and we are going to have you practice an annotated think aloud with a partner. And so the idea is that you're going to take turns. One of you will be the think alouder, if you will. You're going to read and also be saying what's coming to your mind, just like you saw me do with the cartoon. The listener is going to take brief notes, just highlights, kind of like what you saw me do there. In this case, we're going to have a Google Doc that you and your partner will have access to. So you'll just use the comment feature of Google Docs to just write down a word or two of something that's being said. So partner one's going to read and think aloud for just a couple of paragraphs, and then they'll switch roles. Partner two is going to be the think alouder, and partner one noticing and recording, and just a little bit of back and forth. And I'll tell you, if you've never done a think aloud before, it does feel a little awkward to share what's going on in your head as you're reading. I will not lie. It does feel awkward. But again, that's the engaging part. That's when kids are really like, they'll totally get into it. After they get over the initial kind of uncomfortable feeling, they really have fun with this. And that's when we can have those conversations about, what are you doing to make sense of this? We'll talk a little bit more specifically in a minute about reading strategies that came into play. We're going to try to start to name some of the things that either we did or we heard our partner do with the text. So just as an example, I'm going to read the first 2 sentences on this text. And Chris, would you be able to be my partner and add a comment in that piece?
Okay.
Just so that we can model that. Cool. All right, so Jamie's family has plans to spend summer vacation at the remote cabin that is off the grid. All right, I noticed the off the grid has quotes around it. So I'm not really sure why it needs the quotes, but I do know that phrase off the grid usually means no electricity. And sometimes it means to not have your cell phone. I'm thinking of a commercial I used to see on TV. I don't remember what it was for, but they would say, oh, we're going off the grid. Oh, now we're going to go back on the grid. And I don't remember what it was for, but I remember that commercial. This means that they generate their own electricity. Oh, see, I was right. They generate their own electricity instead of buying electricity from a power company. Oh, so I wonder, how do they do that? I wonder if they have solar or wind, or thinking back to the other things that we've looked at, is there going to be some sort of a mechanical generation, right? Like, is someone going to be on a bike or on a rowing machine or what have you? So I'm wondering if there's connections there. Okay, I'm going to pause. And so that's what you guys are going to do. One of you will read and think aloud. The other will just grab, a few kind of key points and take notes, and just take turns back and forth. There is a visual in the middle of the text that you are welcome to also comment on and make connections to. And once you get towards the end of the document, if you could scroll all the way down, Chris, you'll see that there is our scaffold of a metacognitive bookmark. So once you get through the text, if you could then kind of have a brief conversation about, what did you hear each other doing? Did you hear each other predicting or questioning or making connections? So starting to name some of the things, the strategies that you were using. And then when we come back, we'll have you go to some slides further on in the deck and just share some of those strategies that either you or your partner used, so that we can start to see, are there any trends in how we all are making sense of this text? What things did we find helpful? Maybe some unique ideas and approaches that our partner might have used that we want to share out to the whole group, because we want to build a community reading strategies list for how we make sense of text. So ultimately, that's where we're headed. But first, you need to dive in and get your feet wet with the think aloud back in the text. So, all right. Thank you, guys. That's a lot. That's a lot of strategies, a lot of reflection. And first, let me open and just say, would anyone like to give voice to something they wrote? It's okay, Larry. Well, I'm noticing definitely some commonalities across the rooms. Lots of predictions and questioning, making connections for sure. So this particular text obviously really elicits those kind of reading strategies. That was a big aha for me as a science teacher, is when I would read a text before I gave it to my kids, I would slow down and notice, what do I do to make sense of this? And it does change based on the type of text that we're looking at. And certain texts kind of require the reader to do certain strategies more than others. And so like even noticing that and paying attention to that helped me then think about, oh, which reading strategies do my kids really need more practice in? So maybe I'll bring more of that type of text in. And of course, there's always the consideration of the content too, but also like if there's more than one type of text that has the content in it that I need to cover, I can can strategically choose text to also support my kiddos where they need more practice. And I want them to use a routine where, just like in box number 1 in the reflections, it encourages risk-taking by students without fear of feeling dumb. There's no wrong answers with Think Aloud. It truly is just, what do you think? What comes to mind? And what are we noticing about similarities or differences in how we approach this text to make sense of it? And everybody plays. Everybody, you know, it's even your more reluctant readers. You know, when I popped around room to room, you guys are all at the end of a long work day and everybody was engaged. Like you're either reading and thinking aloud or you were taking notes. So there wasn't really anywhere to hide, if you will. But also, yeah, we're digging into that text. And great question, Amy. The next layer is, yeah, let's start to name things. So let's have the students name things. And that's where the bookmarks come into play. And honestly, I found it as such a valuable tool because as science teachers, we don't get a lot of training in literacy. So I needed help naming the types of things I was doing. And the bookmarks helped me when I would model, but then also using those with the students. Chris, could I have you potentially pop to one of the texts in the bookmark?
Sure.
So we just have that bookmark.
Whoops.
Yep, and scroll all the way down to the bookmark itself.
I'm not sure this is what, I think this is the end of the page.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. So
yeah,
I
that's
actually
the end of the page.
used the second and third column the most with my students because it named a few different kinds of, there were more examples of some of the stems. But then I used that checklist part so that they could listen to me when I was modeling and be listening for, when I would kind of say some of these things and kind of mark off when they heard it. And so I would pause and say, okay, what did you hear me doing? And then they start to be able to name that. Well, you predicted like 4 times. Oh, I did. Where? What did I say exactly? How did you know that was a prediction? Or, how did you know when I was summarizing? So one of the things, like when I was popping into rooms, I heard Sherry kind of reading more silently, but she would pause and then she would almost give a gist statement. She would kind of summarize what she had just read. And I heard her doing that quite a bit. So I know that that's like her go-to strategy. When she reads, she kind of reads a little bit, gets a gist, and then continues on and gets the gist. And so it's really kind of cool when we're able to kind of start to name those things, because not only can we then say, here's my strengths, here's what I do, but then hearing what other people do and go, oh, that's cool. I never thought of it that way. Or, you know what? I don't do the gist thing very much. I ask a lot of questions. Or again, particular types of text might elicit more things, particular types of strategies, if you will, as well. So it's a cool kind of thing to pay attention to. And it kind of becomes part of our inquiry. We're not only like, what are we learning science-wise about this, but what are we learning about how we read this thing and how we make sense of it and who, what you bring to it. And I saw Dawn's question about how do you help students with Think Aloud who struggle to read fluently? And that's kind of a nice question, Dawn, because with Think Aloud, part of it is to pause and kind of say what you're thinking. So it doesn't have to be this like smooth kind of thing. Like if there is a word that you are stumbling over, pause and say, gosh, I'm really struggling. This word's really hard. I don't know how to say this word. Like that's part of the Think Aloud, right? So in a way, it almost kind of like it meets people where they are, honestly. And the thing is that we can say, all right, so that would be maybe a fix up, right? Trying to reread this. I'm stuck on this word. It's a roadblock. I can't get past it, but I'm going to get it figured out before I move on. Or maybe it means that you skip over. And so that's a strategy sometimes when there are those roadblock words that hold us up. Sometimes we do have to move on and kind of keep going to keep some rhythm. Ultimately, the kids have to be comfortable to kind of put their thinking out there. you guys mentioned, and to just kind of go back to what was written on the one slide, the chart, somebody said it was a little clunky. It felt a little it feels a little awkward. Totally agree. And so making sure that students feel safe to kind of put their thinking out there is really an important first step. So think about your kids right now and the climate of your classroom. Do they feel safe to where they could kind of put their thinking out there? And if not yet, that's okay. But you model it first. If you share your thinking out there and you authentically stumble sometimes, or, maybe fake stumble in a model as well, to really show like, hey, when we're reading, there are words that trip us up, or our brain kind of goes to this, or my stomach growled, and now I'm thinking about that and not really what I'm reading. So all of those pieces, I know it sounds crazy, but truly that's all going on in our heads. So how do we show kids, hey, this happens to me as an adult reader too, and here's how I kind of get it back under control and get back on track. So we start to model that and make ourselves vulnerable by modeling our thinking, and then slowly asking our kids to do that as well. And honestly, you're going to start in small chunks, just a couple of minute quick pair share, think aloud, before you come back whole group, to keep it brief, keep it light, usually starting off with texts that are not scary, right? That seem more approachable, and then they're more willing to give it a go. So those are some considerations for that. One of the nice things with the MyStar units and some of the templates that we're going to share with you here in a second, the MyStar units that the teachers have created with Reading Apprenticeship, they've kind of had these considerations already, and have the text embedded. If you don't teach one of those particular units and you're thinking about how could I bring something in and have my kids kind of try this on a little bit, you want to start usually with something that is visual, that does seem pretty approachable, and definitely wanting a scaffold there for that conversation. Otherwise, kids will feel really awkward and just kind of sit in silence and not really know what to say. So we needed to give them something like this bookmark that could help them. I'm going to turn it actually over to Chris or Lindsay. But I'll pause for any questions first. We have a few other tools too, to help kiddos with that conversation piece.
All right. We probably want to move into our breakout rooms now, because we have maybe about 15 minutes for you guys to chat, which you could probably spend more time than that, but we'll give you what we have. We have a really nice set here in this document of templates that you could use for Reading Apprenticeship. These are templates that were taken from Unit 7.1 and Unit 8.1, created by the MyStar and RA trained teachers. And then we have some examples of how those templates and some different templates are used actually in the unit. And so there's links there for you to take a look at. And so we'd like you to just have a little time to kind of poke around in there and maybe bounce some ideas and thoughts off of a couple other people. I'm going to create some different breakout rooms, so there'll be a few more people in each breakout room, so you have a few more people to meet and talk to, and then we'll pull you back at about 4:50-ish, 4:55, and ask you to just share a highlight or two from your discussion and take a look at any other questions that you have.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had some good discussions with your breakout room folks. Would room number one like to share a takeaway that you discussed in your breakout room?
What's that? Don and Erica and Mike?
Oh, yes, yes.
Okay. I didn't remember the room number. This is Erica. One takeaway for sure was that some of these new templates look very interesting and definitely an improvement upon some of the items that we have right now in MyStar. Don had a very kind of innovative idea of using kind of a template to do those read alouds with the partners and having those strategies taped to the desk so that students can kind of check those off. And we talked briefly about the 25-word summary template in secondary, giving the students direction as to what they're looking for while they're reading. That was about it, unless you have something else to add, Don.
Thank you, Erica.
Thank you, Erica. That was great. Room 2, would you like to share something? That was Julie, Larry, Sherry, and Tiffany. Anything different that you'd like to share?
We talked a little bit about how nice it's been to see more of this brought into the units. And we talked about the text in the middle. A couple of us are in 7.6 and have used that. That was very helpful. And another thing that I had mentioned too, is nice to be here to see some of the stuff, because sometimes all the MyStar stuff can be so overwhelming that you don't always know that those things are there. So it's nice to kind of highlight it. Okay, now I know this is here. I can go and grab that resource and give that a try. So that was really really a nice thing to be able to find out. So I don't know, you guys I don't remember anything else that we brought up. Just loving having all these extra strategies and more reading within the units has been very helpful.
And I wanted to add too, with I found out that with the sub resources for there's reading resources, I hadn't seen that link. So that was super helpful for me, where there's 2 articles for the genetics unit. And that is a great plan. Maybe do one with the kids when I'm there. And then they kind of get the gist of how to do it. So as you probably have heard, it's tough when we're out for a day or 2 with MyStar. It's like, what do I do? Because subs aren't going to be able to do it. So that was super helpful for me. I'm so glad I found out that today.
That's great. Thanks, Larry and Sherry. Larry's talking about some subplan links that are on each unit's main unit page. And those can be used on unsupervised, I guess. And, really applying those reading apprenticeship strategies like with your students and modeling how you do those, think alouds or things can be an in-class activity that you want to, engage with your students. So a couple different, reading opportunities we've put out there recently. Anything from room 3 that you'd like to share? That's Amy, Brooke, and Wendy. I've already covered a lot of good content with the other 2 breakout rooms.
We talked a lot of, oh, go ahead. Go ahead. We talked a lot about the 25-word summary. Wendy gave us some ideas. She's used it a lot in her classroom and has found a lot of value in it. We talked about how even some adjustments on the 25-word summary could help us to differentiate, for some of our lower students, giving them a word bank to use, versus maybe some of the higher students not needing that. And then, we, of course, looked through, other strategies as well, but we spent a lot of time talking about the 25-word summary.
Great. Thank you, Brooke. So on the next slide, we did try to compile some of these resources. So hopefully you have a one-stop slide to get to. The highlighted 2 bullets are specifically what we looked at today in the session. So if you're really trying to think about where those went, we'll paste this in the agenda and share it with all the resources at the end as well. But wanted to get this here for you in case you need to use it tomorrow, perhaps. So we just have a few more opportunities coming up virtually for MyStar. Please register for the Last Learning Series. We have 2 new off-the-shelf lessons that won't come out until the new subscription in August, but if you come in May, you get the lesson plan early. And so we'll talk about those with some teachers. And then we also have a PLF and teacher leader training this summer in June and July. So if you're interested in growing your teacher leadership skills, please apply for that as well. And that's all we have for you today. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Heather, for the wealth of knowledge that you share every time you come visit our learning series. If you would give us some feedback, we have a form you can share, or you can throw something in the chat. We love to hear, what your takeaways were. And we can stick around for questions with Heather, but thank you so much and have a great evening.